And we're recording.
Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the April 6, 2021 District Planning Committee meeting via Zoom. I wanted to start by reading and reviewing the purpose and the goals. The purpose of the District Planning Committee will be to develop and recommend to the Cape Elizabeth School Board a plan or plans to return our students to in-school learning while honoring the following three goals: safety of students and staff, students' learning, assessment and equity, social and emotional well-being of students and staff. So just keeping those in mind as we go through today. We have a lot to do today, so that's why we're starting right on the dot. Just an update. The Maine CDC has revised, actually right after, the day after Jill presented her work of art on exposing students and contact tracing. The next day, the Maine CDC revised its standard operating procedures for contact tracing. And I think Dr. Rosenthal is going to mention that today. But the procedures include contact tracing for students who are within 6 feet for 15 minutes in assigned seats. And it's that assigned seats that is going to be the thing that we need to keep track of. If students are not in assigned seats, then we have to, I believe, contact trace the whole class. But and they might be subject to quarantining, but it's 6 feet for 15 minutes if students are in assigned seats. So we're going to start working with this procedure. And in fact, last night we started working with it after contacting the Maine CDC. So instead of having an entire classroom placed in quarantine today, only the student who tested positive had to be quarantined. So that's good news and will hopefully help us as we proceed. So I've asked Dr. Rosenthal to do a presentation on student social and emotional risks in this COVID time. So Dr. Rosenthal, are you ready to do your presentation?
Yes, let me just get my slides.
Okay, good. And you should be all set to present, to share your screen.
It says host disabled participant screen sharing.
All right, Jen, you have to do your magic.
I just made you co-host. You want to try again?
Yeah.
You
Yes.
were already a co-host.
Perfect, that is working.
All right, wonderful.
All right. Like Donna said, she asked me to put together a presentation on the mental health impacts of children during COVID-19. And I did just also want to include that one update that Donna just went over. So this is just the Maine Department of Education. This is the update Donna was talking about, which is the update to the standard operating procedures. And I just put in yellow, and then also it's true again in the 2 lines down, that when there are 1 or 2 cases, this is again in cases of assigned seating, when there are 1 or 2 cases of COVID in a single classroom or multiple classrooms, cohorts, pods, the schools can now follow the CDC guidelines for contact tracing and only contact trace those who are within 6 feet for a cumulative 15 minutes in a 24-hour period rather than the whole classroom. When it's 3 or more cases, that's considered an outbreak. That's sort of the definition of outbreak that people have been following, and then it still needs to be the entire classroom. And the goal of this, I think, is to just decrease the number of children that need to be out of school. Like was presented last time, it can be really kind of onerous. And the whole goal is to be able to decrease disruptions to participation in school. So back to the mental health component, I wanted to kind of hit 3 objectives. The first is reviewing some data on mental health impacts of COVID in children. There's a lot of data out there. Donna asked me about this on Friday, so I definitely this is not all encompassing, but I did reach out to some area mental health providers and other providers just to get their perspectives as well. So I wanted to include some of that, and then briefly also review just some other impacts of COVID on children's well-being outside of just the obvious sort of like respiratory COVID symptoms. So this first study looked at emergency room mental health visits in children and teens during COVID. And this was a CDC study that included a large number of participants. And basically this is relevant and important because emergency departments are often the first point of care for children who are experiencing mental health emergencies, especially when other services are less accessible. And during COVID, the rates of emergency room visits for a lot of things in kids have declined. But the proportion, and so that's relevant, but also the proportion of mental health visits in children has increased. So compared to 2019, in 2020, the proportion of mental health visits in children ages 5 to 11 increased 24%, and in children 12 to 17 increased 31%. And what the study sort of brought to people's attention is that children's mental health warranted sufficient concern to visit emergency departments during a time when non-emergent emergency department visits were discouraged. So basically people were sort of triaging and not going to the emergency room for all sorts of things they had gone for in the past, but still for mental health visits, it was serious enough that they had to go even with the concerns about infection. And this is just a visual looking at the different age groups that they looked at. So the top one is 0 to 4-year-olds. That didn't really differ between 2019 and 2020. The middle is 5 to 11-year-olds, and then the bottom is the adolescents. And so basically you can just see that the dashed line, which is 2020, the rates were higher for the children in the 5 to 11 and 12 to 17-year-old age groups throughout the entire weeks, the 42 weeks that they looked at. This is a study that looked at suicidal thinking and attempts in children during COVID. So suicide is the second leading cause of death among children and adolescents, 10 to 17. The first is accidents. And this study looked at suicidal thinking and attempts in a pediatric emergency room in Texas before compared to during the pandemic. And they found an increase in suicidal thoughts and attempts in age 11 to 21, although they said that the majority of their data came, I think, in the 11 to 18-year-old age group. So the odds of recent suicidal thinking were higher in March and July of 2020 as compared to those same months in 2019. And then unfortunately, the odds of suicide attempt were higher in a number of months in 2020 compared to 2019. And what the study just talked about is the particular months where they saw these increases were around times when new restrictions were put in place related to COVID. And then rates improved some when like some mandates were taken away, and then increased again when some of those mandates were put back in place because COVID numbers were rising. This is the only study that I found that looked at mode of school instruction and children's well-being. This is from the COVID Experiences Nationwide Survey, and this was a phone survey of parents of children ages 5 to 12. And it looked at differences in child and parent experiences and indicators of well-being according to the children's mode of school instruction. So there were 1,300 parents included in this. The large majority of them, 93%, had children in public schools. And they broke it down by about 50% were fully virtual, about a third or so were fully in person, and then about a quarter were what they called combined or the hybrid model. And what they found was in terms of effects on children, and I'm presenting the data on the hybrid model compared to the in-person model, since that's really what we've been talking about in this group. The children who were in the hybrid model had their parents reported decreased physical activity and time spent outside, decreased in-person time with friends, and worsened mental or emotional health. And then in terms of effects on parents, parents of children in the hybrid model reported more loss of work and more conflict between working and providing childcare. And in their discussion, they talked about how regular physical activity is associated with children's improved fitness and reduced risk for depression, anxiety, and chronic health conditions, and that isolation and limited physical and outside activity can adversely affect children's mental health. And then they also talked about how chronic stress can negatively impact physical and mental health in children and parents, and especially in those without social and economic supports, and that this could contribute to widening of educational and health disparities. This one study looked at the impact of remote learning on children with ADHD, and I thought this was useful just because ADHD is a common diagnosis. It's seen in about 10% of kids aged 6 to 11 and about 15% of kids ages 12 to 17. And this is in a remote learning group, so it's not fully relevant to what we're doing, but I think it probably is at least somewhat relevant to the remote learning days. They found, first of all, that families were spending more money to support the remote learning. There was a 41% decrease in the amount of school services that were offered as compared to before the pandemic and before students went remote. Teens with ADHD had more remote learning issues than those without ADHD. Parents of those with ADHD had more difficulty supporting the remote learning and had more difficulty with homeschool communication. And about a third of parents of students who had ADHD and also had an IEP or a 504 reported that remote learning was very challenging. And this was more than students who had ADHD but didn't have an IEP or 504, and then also more than students who just didn't have either of those, so no diagnosis of ADHD. And specifically, they mentioned that students with ADHD struggled with having fewer routines. They had more negative affects, so sort of like more negative emotion and more difficulty concentrating. This study looked at, this was a systemic review. So it was a study that looked at a lot of, it sort of was a conglomeration of a lot of studies looking at social isolation and loneliness and the effect on mental health in kids for all sorts of different reasons. It was like looked at studies over a number of decades. And so they talked about the fact that quarantine is known to cause negative mental health effects in adults, and that children and adolescents are at higher risk of developing mental health problems compared to adults just in general. And they found associations between children that sort of rated themselves as having more social isolation and loneliness. They were also found to have higher rates of depression. Again, in kids with more social isolation and loneliness, they had higher rates of anxiety. And specifically with anxiety, it was the types of anxiety that they saw was social anxiety, generalized anxiety, panic, suicidal thinking, self-harm, and disordered eating. And they found that it was the duration of loneliness that was a bigger factor than the degree of loneliness. The one study that actually looked at quarantine for sort of the same types of reasons that we're dealing with now with COVID. It was a study that looked at social isolation during the H1N1 flu pandemic, and children who experienced enforced isolation and quarantine because of the H1N1 pandemic were 5 times more likely to need mental health intervention and had higher rates of post-traumatic stress compared with those who had not needed to isolate or quarantine during that time. Switching gears a little bit from sort of data to just experiences of people that work in the field. This was an article in the journal Pediatrics, which is a major journal of children's health. And this was some medical providers reporting on different reasons, just advocating for children with the school closures. And one of the things they commented on, which I think we all know, but I think it's worth saying out loud and speaks to sort of the importance of our educators and school staff, is educators, school social workers, and counselors are an important source of emotional support for students, and often the first to observe warning signs of a mental health crisis or unsafe situation. And so this sort of speaks to the concerns that I think people have probably heard about, where rates of reporting of various things are lower. So rates of reporting child abuse are lower, but no one thinks that actual rates of those things happening is lower. It's just that these things aren't necessarily being caught or seen. This was an article by a psychiatrist in one of the psychiatric journals, and they spoke to the fact that COVID has had a complex array of factors on mental health of children and adolescents in terms of uncertainty, social isolation, and parental angst. And they talked about how predictability is a stabilizing force for children and adolescents, and that's obviously been disrupted. And so that probably speaks to part of why depression and anxiety have been so prevalent. And this is also something I thought was really important to mention because I have worried about this myself in my own practice. But obviously, we've talked a lot about sort of how COVID can cause more mental health issues in a lot of children. But then on the other hand, this is from this study or from this article, for other youths, particularly those with social anxiety disorders, remaining at home and doing online schooling may temporarily relieve their anxiety, but this is not a long-term solution and may result in overwhelming anxiety when it's necessary to return to school. So this is obviously something that we need to keep in mind. This I thought was important. So Erin Belfort is a local child psychiatrist, and she was not able to be here during the meeting today, but I wanted to pass along some of her thoughts in terms of the impact of COVID on children and sort of how being away from school has impacted kids. So she commented on 5 areas. So 1, school is a place for safety, and we've talked about some of that. School is a place for equity. So children have different learning needs. Families have different finances. There's food insecurity and supervision. And so different kids have been impacted differently during the pandemic. I'm just going to read what she said about social isolation because I don't think I can sum it up any better than she did. COVID-19 and the social isolation has hit my adolescent patients the hardest. The normal developmental tasks for adolescents have been disrupted. Adolescents are meant to explore and consolidate their identities. Who am I? It's a big question. It's done in the context of social relationships, mostly with peers. They navigate friendships and they explore intimacy. They practice independence and autonomy away from their families, skills that they will need for adulting. The social isolation among the kids I work with is profound. Demoralization, I'm just going to read her words on that as well. The lack of structure and purpose combined with social isolation, missing of sports and other important achievements and milestones has led many to feel demoralized and hopeless. In the absence of a fully formed frontal lobe, which is the part of our brains which helps us take perspective and imagine future consequences, it's hard for young people to see the light at the end of the tunnel. This feels like, quote, forever to them, and relatively speaking, when you're only lived 14 years, it is. And I, unfortunately, in talking to some of the inpatient hospital attendings, and again, this is anecdotal, but they've seen more suicide attempts. And, in talking to kids, it's sort of, they've heard a lot of the sort of demoralizing kind of language in talking with those patients. And then we've talked about depression and anxiety rates are increasing. The last thing I wanted to mention just is the other health impacts of COVID on children. So there was a study in children that was presented in a journal called Obesity. And they looked at children during the pandemic and found that they've had increased food intake, especially with unhealthy foods like sugary drinks, junk food. I think they said kids were eating an average of 1 additional meal a day, increased sleep, which could be not a bad thing depending on how much increased sleep they're getting. Added about 5 hours a day of screen time, and then there was decreased physical activity. And they just talked about how school environments provide structure and routine around all of these things, and that these things are implicated in obesity. And I can definitely say that I've seen like significant weight gain in a lot of my patients. And we already have an obesity epidemic, so this is going to be something that we really need to work on. So that's really all that I wanted to present. I know there's a lot. I'm happy to take questions or comments now, or we can leave that for later.
Does anyone have questions or comments for Dr. Rosenthal? Thank you very much for that. That was interesting and startling.
Yeah.
Amanda.
Thank you. I was trying to jot all these notes down. Can you clarify, Dr. Rosenthal, the notes about social isolation and loneliness? The language specifically referred to quarantine. So are we? So we're thinking about the kids that are put into quarantine when they're identified as a close contact, or was that term used in a different way in that study? I know it's from the H1N1.
Yeah. Oh, that's a really good question. I don't think they specifically were talking about 10 days of quarantine if they were around a positive case. I think they were talking about more like lockdown measures, but that was a review article. And so it didn't go into all the details of the different studies, but I can definitely go back and look at what they said about that particular one.
Thank you. That's helpful. More of a lockdown situation than a close contact. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Kate Zellers is next.
Kate.
Yes. I was just wondering, I found that startling and really sad. I was also just wondering, have we looked at, or is there any intention of looking at, or is there any data on the mental well-being or the physical well-being of educators and staff, school staff members during the pandemic?
That is a great question, and that was not the presentation I was asked to give,
Right.
so I haven't read about that myself. And I can say I'm sure that there are some things out there it would be definitely interesting to see, and I can imagine that there's been increased stress among educators and all sorts of people that have worked through the pandemic. I don't know about what the literature on the healthcare providers says either. I just know my own personal experience going through it.
Zakia's next.
Thank you,
Zakia?
Jessica. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Jessica, thank you for the presentation. I wanted to ask you about the studies that you reviewed. I assume that most of them are cross-sectional. Can you confirm?
Yeah, I mean, definitely, I think that the study of like the emergency room visits that the CDC, that I referenced from the CDC was cross-sectional. I'd have to look back, but yeah, probably a number of them are. And again,
I wondered if
that's where I definitely want to say that's where I said associations. So, anytime we talk about like associations or correlations, we can't imply causation, which is true for all sorts of studies that we've talked about throughout this. And I don't think we've gotten to the bottom of everything that's going on, but, I think it's just important to present what we are seeing.
Yeah, I was wondering if you could specifically address the limitations of those, that type of study in particular, because the studies that you looked at didn't probably, for the most part at least, didn't even really examine, the association of those outcomes with school, for example, and specifically, or they were just looking at these situations during the pandemic, right?
Yeah, different studies controlled for different things. So I don't have at my fingertips like which controlled for which factors. The only one that I found that really looked at the school, I mentioned the one that I said that looked at the mode of school instruction. Obviously, that was what that study was getting at specifically. So they obviously did.
Yeah. Just what I'm thinking is that a lot of, the data that we have from prior outbreaks or this type of, type of thing show that a lot of this type of mental health outcomes are common during these type of events, wars or pandemics in general. So not just specific to school in general, but this type of mental health, these type of mental health outcomes, we have seen them before with these kind of, sort of global occurrences. So just wanting to point that out, and also to note that, you did mention that the suicide attempts was anecdotal, but I think that is worth mentioning again, that we do not have that data for during the pandemic at the state level, and certainly not in this age group.
Yeah, I don't know that we have a state level, like for Maine, that was looking specifically at the pandemic in Texas. And it was looking specifically at the age group, but I don't know about Maine. That's true.
Thanks.
Bree is next.
Bree?
Hi, Jessica, that was so helpful. Thank you for doing that. I just thought it might be helpful for me to speak just really quickly to what myself and my colleagues in the counseling and social work department are seeing. So we are presenting to the school board next week about our support. So we've been talking a lot. And I also, knowing that I was going to be the person on the committee to represent them, we created a Google Doc for sheets. So I'll try to be super quick, but I just wanted to, some of the things that Jessica presented, I would say that we are seeing here in Cape Elizabeth, and some things maybe less so. definitely seeing an increase in checking in with kids. Just overall, like I think here at Pond Cove, there's definitely more students that are receiving weekly one-on-one counseling or social work support than ever before. A part of that is because Pond Cove has another school counselor, so there's more opportunity for that, but we're definitely seeing increased need. I probably talk to kids, I'll speak for myself, about worry more than anything else prior to the pandemic, and that's definitely increased. And an increase in some signs of depression and kiddos talking about the lack of connection. So I will say that I feel like we are seeing that here. One thing I really wanted that came up a lot with my colleagues that I saw Jessica's research referred to is that return to school anxiety. And that's one of the reasons I really wanted to be on this committee is I feel like, and I think Zakia referenced this too, that we know that what we're seeing in kids isn't only because of the changes to school. We're also all living in a pandemic and it's hard stuff. And so I just want to make sure that we are not only thoughtful about our plans in terms of change, but also really thoughtful of how we're going to prepare ourselves and kids really well for whatever change might be coming. Because I think we are already, all three buildings are already seeing that the kids are privy to there might be a change. We might be coming back to school more. We may be 4 days a week. We may be 5 days a week. You know, we've heard that from, kindergarten and first graders. And there's definitely some increased anxiety that I think comes with any kind of change. And we know that, right? Even like really positive things can bring about anxiety, and especially young kids, particularly if they feel like adults are also anxious about it or uncertain about it or have feelings about it. So I'm definitely seeing that. And one of the things I don't have data about, but I will say that the experiences of our kids are so varied. We have kids that the hybrid setting works for them, that having, some less structured time, or they have homes where there's a parent there really like focused on them, they can play outside, is really working for them. So that shift would be hard. We have kiddos that have high risk people at home that are really anxious about kids getting close to them or kids taking off masks. So I think just thinking about those students and their needs. We also know there's a lot of kids and families that want schools open as soon as possible. So I just think as we think about all of our kids and all of our families and the equity piece, that we just, want to be really thoughtful, because we're definitely seeing the gamut of how kids and families are reacting to this really tough position that we're in. And then I'll just echo what Kate said, that we know that particularly at our level with little kids, our 4 through 11-year-old friends, that so much of how they feel and the coping strategies that they show are based on how we as adults are reacting and how we're able to teach them how to keep themselves safe, how things work. So it's just really important that whatever we decide to do the rest of this year and moving forward, that we give staff, teachers, parents too, the times to really prepare our kids and really make sure that we know what things are going to look like so that we can be confident for them. So thank you. I hope that didn't take up too much time.
No, thank you. I mean, it's so helpful to hear from someone in the school, and I completely agree that change is overwhelming, and kids this is going to be hard. Change just is hard. I always say I hate change. So
Thanks, Bree. Wynn.
Thanks for the presentation. I think we all are in school, we all recognize the feelings of kids, and while the data is certainly, it's eye-opening, I don't think it surprises any of us who have been in the building all year. And I would also like to thank Kate for mentioning the stress that teachers are feeling. I would, encourage us, even though the chances of this may not be that great, is that one of the things that was mentioned is that if we do have, the kids experience increased anxiety if there are, if restrictions are put back in place. In other words, that happens. So I think we have to prepare as a district that if something were to go wrong and things don't go the way we hope they go, if we bring kids back, that we really have some plan in place for that. The possible ramifications for kids' mental health if we do, bring kids back, and then it's like pull it back from them, and how they might experience that, especially the idea of the light at the end of the tunnel. That's just that'll dim the light right away. So it's just, I think, something we have to really think about.
Thanks, Lynn. So I just want to remind people that we are using the main DOE and CDC designations of green based on their guidance to do so. However, we realize that COVID numbers are increasing. I was just listening to Dr. Shaw this afternoon, especially at the younger ages, and that Cumberland County is designated as at high red using the federal CDC standards. So just wanted to point that out. And also that, and I think this goes along with what Wynn was saying, decisions that are made regarding the end of the school year may have to change depending on our ratings. So if Cumberland County goes to yellow and we decided to go back to full time, we would probably have to go into full remote, because if we change, we would have to do some changes in order to, and we'll talk about this in a minute, in order to go to bringing kids back to school full time. We would have to do some changing in scheduling, more in some schools than others. And it would be impossible to switch back at that point to the hybrid model. So we would end up having to go back into fully remote. So as we think about this, we need to think about those changes and what might be the consequences. It would really be, there would be no way to go seamlessly from full in school to back to hybrid. And this seems so silly to talk about, but it's the furniture piece that keeps coming up. And it seems, at first glance to be a ridiculous reason not to send students back to school, but we have ordered furniture. We've gotten reports back from the companies that it could either be from 2 weeks to, oh, we'll have it to you by the end of school. And the truth is that we don't have furniture for all of our students. So we would have to deal with that if the furniture didn't come in. And some of the districts have recently undergone building projects, so they happen to have extra furniture that they are able to put into their classrooms, desks, in order to do the 3 feet spacing. But we don't have any, and we haven't been able to find any. We have looked in the area, and we can't have students sitting on the floor. So in reality, the furniture piece is pretty important to us. So just some things to keep in mind as we move forward. So we have been working since the governor's increased capacity announcement, when we learned that we could accommodate feeding all of our students, on plans for returning students to school. So before we started putting the options to the committee, we decided we needed to, the administrative team really need to work on whether these options might be feasible. So we have some options to present to you that we feel are feasible. We have 3 plans, and we spent a lot of time this morning talking about the challenges and benefits for the plans. So Jen, do you want to bring my slides up?
Yeah.
So I'm just going to walk you through these. Great. So remember, we have 3 options that we've really studied in depth. So the first option would be really to continue with the present hybrid and 100% remote learning plans. So we looked at some benefits, consistency. Teachers have made curriculum plans for end of the year goals based on the current schedule. Teachers are seeing a lot of advantages of having smaller classes, students' comfort in speaking up because there's smaller number of students. Safety measures we know have been successful. Consistency in staffing, so we would be able to keep the same staffing, doing the same, in the same positions for the rest of the year. We wouldn't need any additional funding. One of the pieces that we need to look at is childcare consistency, as many of our teachers are younger and have young children that they have to find childcare for. And then of course, the safety in smaller cohorts as we look at rising numbers and quarantining. Challenges of staying with what we're doing. There's no additional in-time school for students, and we know that we realize the social and emotional risks. Again, some uncertainties, the furniture piece and the COVID numbers, which we just don't know what's going to happen in the future. And then of course, the community pressures to increase in-class time that we're all facing. Okay, next slide, Jen. So the next option we looked at would be option 2, continue with the present hybrid and 100% remote learning plans, adding in Wednesday mornings for alternate cohorts. So we would have maroon 1 week and gold the next week for our hybrid students. And that could start right after the April break. So benefits to that would be adding a half day. So that really turns into 4 half days per cohort if you look from April 26th to the end of the year, while still maintaining the hybrid model and the 100% remote learning. Would be a step to providing normalcy for students. So an additional day in school every other week. Again, consistency in staffing. We would need no additional funding. The transportation schedule would remain the same, just adding in the Wednesday mornings. And again, the safety of smaller cohorts. Challenges would be childcare. We would have to look at on Wednesdays. Many of our neighboring districts are keeping Wednesdays, whatever they're doing, they're keeping Wednesdays the same. We use Wednesday mornings. As I've talked to people, they are finding them so important and valuable because they're using Wednesday mornings for individual student support time. So that would be a challenge of finding time to support those students who are getting extra support at this point. Okay, Jen. So then we have option 3. Students return to school 4 or 5 days a week. And actually we had a long talk about this today and realized that 4 days would be the much better option for many reasons. With a roll-in period, this would begin after the spring break, probably on May 10th. And we also talked about this April or May, April 26th or May 10th date. And I'll talk about that in a minute, the benefits of that. So the benefits of returning students full-time, be it 4 or 5 days. Additional academic days, really a return to normalcy for the students. Setting up for success in the fall. So planning on being back to school full-time in the fall, this would be sort of a roll-in for that. At the high school, it would offer more time to support students who are in danger of failing. So between now and the end of the year, it would support students' social and emotional needs. Transportation for hybrid students K-8 and K-12 special education students would remain similar. So the scheduling wouldn't need to change. It could remain what it is now, basically, except for there would not be transportation for high school students. And it would allow teachers to focus on in-person instruction. Right now, teachers are working, as the teachers who are here today can attest, they are doing double planning because they're planning for their remote students and they're also planning for their in-class students. So they're really doing double planning. Challenges, we'll go over to the left. Safety risk with greater number of students, possibly larger number of quarantines. Now the change in the standard operating procedure will undoubtedly help that, but it still could result in larger number of quarantines. Child care for staff if we have Wednesday sessions. So that was one of the things we looked at for thinking about still maintaining the Wednesdays without students in school. Transportation for, again, for the K-8 hybrid students only, and the K-12 special education students. School will be different. And I think we have to realize that when we think about sending kids back to school, it's different. And you're going to see some pictures today of some classes that are set up, and no longer are the desks, in tables or students sitting in tables. The desks are in rows. All desks are facing the same way. The teacher's at the head of the class. There's no small group or partner work. It's all those things that we've worked so hard to improve in education, and we can't do them because of the social distancing. So when we think about school, it will look different for our kiddos. So more challenges, the interruption of the schedule. New scheduling in most schools will be necessary. So this is a difficult thing for students and for teachers to do in the middle of the year, let alone at this point in the year, when usually coming back from April break is a time we concentrate on assessments, and people are tired. So it will be an interruption of the schedule that we now have, and a challenge. It can be done, but it will be a challenge to settle into a new schedule. Again, the furniture thing. We will need 2 days for teachers to set up their classrooms without students. People are on vacation and they have vacation plans, and we can't ask them to come in during vacation to set up the room. So they would need that time. And there's also some planning to do. And I think Troy's going to talk a little bit more about that later. It would help with contact tracing. Excuse me, the challenge would be contact tracing, more possibilities of having to contact trace with students in school. One of the things we looked at with the 4 or 5 days is having the Wednesdays as remote days now has been a blessing with our contact tracing, because if there's a break during the week when students are there, so when we count back to how many hours it's been since their symptoms showed up, Wednesdays have just been a blessing to not have them in school that day. And also the nurses have spent a lot of time on Wednesdays actually doing the contact tracing. So contact tracing will increase, I'm sure. At the middle school, the students are now pretty much in cohorts with a little bit of crossover, but they would need to change their schedule so that the cohorts would be totally eliminated in order to meet the scheduling needs at the middle school. So that would be a change. The teachers would need time, and the students time, to reestablish classroom procedures and dynamics. And there's a concern about students in the hallways, because we can't ensure, as much as we talk to students about being 6 feet or 3 feet apart, once they get out into the hallways, we can't ensure, and people need to know that they're going to maintain their distances. So we can pretty much control them in the classrooms, but once they empty out into the hallways, that's always traditionally been a socializing time. So that will be difficult. Okay, Jen. So looking at 4 days a week, so that would be a Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. Benefits: additional academic time. Wednesdays would remain the same for hybrid and remote, or really it would be full-time and remote. And then really would be used the same to support students and bring classes to a consistent place in learning within the class. So taking, say, an elementary class, we're bringing the gold cohort and the maroon cohort together. It's very possible that those two cohorts are in different places. As much as the teachers have tried to keep the learning in the same progression, that would practically be impossible. So the Wednesday mornings would allow those students who might be a little behind the rest of the class, the teachers can work with them to catch up. The daycare would be consistent with the surrounding districts. It would act as a contact tracing buffer. There would be time to rebuild academic stamina. Talked a lot about academic stamina. Returning students to, the teachers have been teaching 4 days, but the students have been only going to school for 2 days. So building that academic stamina, the students are going to be tired. This would give us time to build the academic stamina, time to address social and emotional needs. And we've talked a lot as an administrative team about taking the time if students come back for more time in school, taking the time to address the social emotional needs. It's always important when you bring students back after the summer to build that community in your classroom, to establish the rules and procedures. And that will all have to be done again when the students come back. Allied arts teachers will be teaching the students in school and also the planning for the remote students. So they will need time on Wednesdays to create instructional videos for their remote students. Time for IEP meetings. Right now that's Wednesdays. There have been a lot of IEP meetings, and that's been great to have that time. Continue Wednesday support student services for the students in the morning. And the high school is using Wednesday mornings for, I think it's Wednesday mornings, Wednesday sometime for their advisory time. So that would be a continued benefit. Okay, Jen.
Did you not go over the challenges down on the
Oh,
left?
sorry. Oh, challenges? Challenges. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Changing schedules in mid-year again. Stress on the staff and the students with a schedule change. Again, it is not, I moved my classroom 1 year in the middle of the year, and it was really tough. So stress on staff and students with schedule change. It's doable, but it will be stressful, and it will be difficult. Again, the furniture, the safety risk of having more students back in our classes at a time, and just increased exposure and more quarantined students and staff. And again, school will look different for everyone. So that is a huge change in itself. Okay, now, great. We looked at 5 days, and really, the administrative team really strongly does not recommend this. It would just, it would be too much too soon. Additional academic time, but we think at this time of year, it would just, people are already tired, students are already tired. It would just wear people out. We would be able to probably spend a lot of time addressing social and emotional needs of students, which we could do with the 4 days as well. With both ideas, we'd probably be spending more time on that than academics at first. Challenges: a change in schedule mid-year, time to adjust. The loss of Wednesday support for students by classroom teachers was a huge factor that we talked about. The stress on staff and students. Safety risks: it would not give us that buffer or that time for contact tracing, and that has been huge this year. People who aren't in the trenches, I don't think realize that, but that has really been huge. More quarantined students and staff because they're in school an additional day, the daycare piece, and the furniture. So thanks, Jen. So thinking about roll-in, we rolled in students at the beginning of the year, and people said they were so appreciative, parents and staff, for the slow roll-in. So we've been thinking about how we could roll people in. So roll our students in. We looked at starting to do this right after April break, and we looked at a little bit of data. We've only had 15 letters, including one that went out yesterday, that are COVID related. So we have been super, super fortunate, and not because we haven't worked hard, because we have worked hard to keep our numbers down. But we have only had to send out 15, counting yesterday, letters. So I looked back people have asked for data about connections with vacations. And out of those 15, 2 of the letters had to be sent out right within the 2-week period after Thanksgiving, 2 after Christmas, and 2 after the February break. So while we have just that tiny bit of data and it's not really significant, there is a pattern. Thinking about bringing students back and then the possibility of having to close things down again right away, it seems to make more sense to move the break after the 10 days that would follow the bringing students back the 10 days after the break. So the high school has a little different situation. So Jeff is thinking that May 6th, seniors would return to school and 9 to 11 students would stay in hybrid. And then and bringing back all of the seniors. And then on May 24th, the seniors go out and do their transition projects. So they would not be in school anyway. But so then the 9th through 11th grade students would return to school. And on May 10th, Pond Cove and the middle school would do a roll-in schedule, and the principals will talk about that. Pond Cove and middle school's teachers would use April 28th and May 5th, their Wednesdays. So there would be no meetings assigned to those days. They would have those days fully for room preparation and planning. It allows more time for staff vaccinations. We're to that point where we're looking at the 2 weeks past the second vaccination. So that really would allow staff more time. There would be no in-school student days for room preparation because we would use the Wednesdays and the furniture. So it would allow time for more furniture arrival. Now, if the furniture doesn't come, we would have to do some kind of a prioritization of grades and roll in our students based on how we can seat them in the classes. So that's an unknown that we will have to deal with. I think that was the last slide, Jen. Yeah. So I'm going to go right into, we're going to roll right into the principals' presentations. And then after that, we'll have a time of questions because they may answer some of the questions that have arisen. So Jason, do you want to start?
I could. I did just ask first, are we planning to stop at 4? Is that?
No.
Okay. Okay. Then yes. Okay.
You should talk fast.
Okay. Great. Okay. I will share.
I actually think I put 4:30 on the agenda. So.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I didn't look.
I did.
Okay. Good. Okay. So can everyone see this?
Yes.
Okay. Hold on a sec. Okay, so just to start, and I will try to move through this relatively quickly, but being very clear, let me know if I'm kind of rambling. There is a lot of information here. What I want to just start by saying, Donna just went through a lot of the, assumptions that would be things that we would assume it would be in place if we were to be able to reopen, and some of the challenges and the benefits. And so this presentation is really about the logistics of providing more in-person learning for hybrid students and assuming 3-foot learning, 3-foot distancing in the classroom for learning and 6-foot for eating, including breakfast and lunch and snack. So this is, I just want to be clear that this is an overview of the logistics. There are many, many other factors that we would need to discuss if this was to come to fruition. So let me start with, hold on, it's not letting me. Okay. So basically, as Donna mentioned, we've been working on some plans in terms of what are options. Can we possibly reopen given space, given enrollment, current enrollment? Is it feasible to have the conversations about reopening in the spring for the remainder of the school year? One of the things that has begun, which is just at the very beginning stages of some brainstorming with staff. And this has been in just individual conversations, but also in our last grade level team leaders meeting. We started brainstorming what would students need, what would families need, what would staff need if we were to increase in-person learning for hybrid students this spring. We'll continue to do this as a staff. We've done furniture audits in the classrooms. We've ordered additional furniture, and as Donna mentioned, the arrival time is undetermined. We've been working on revising lunch schedules, creating snack schedules, because we wouldn't be able to eat in the classrooms because we would no longer be at 6 feet. And we'll need to come up with a plan for serving breakfast and supervising breakfast, because that would no longer be in the classroom as well. We also have a tent rental, which is in motion, and we should receive the tent. I'm not sure when, but should be sometime before too long. Okay. So the development of a reopening timeline is very important, and that's what we're talking about today. Because we certainly, one of the things that staff have said, and I've known all along, is we certainly need time to do this right in the best interest of students if we do it. Transportation we're starting to have conversations about our parent pickup and drop off. We'll need to restructure that. So dismissal and arrival, particularly dismissal, but also probably arrival, will be very, very long, because we'll probably have two staggered in order to deal with traffic and also just congestion within inside the building. Will stagger dismissal and drop off. So students will actually leave school and potentially come to school at different times if they're transported by a caregiver. And so we're going to be reworking our school-wide schedule. We're working on that to allow adequate planning time to prepare for students each day if we open for more in-person learning, and needing to take a look at revising special education, English learners, and RTI support schedules for students. Just kind of giving you some of the background. So here is an option that is feasible logistically. So based on everything I know right now, I would suggest that the conversations begin talking about a 4-day in-person schedule. Fully remote students would need to stay fully remote to make this work for spacing and staffing. Wednesdays would be designated for teacher planning time, student support, including RTI and regular classroom teacher individual support in the mornings, as happening now, and professional development. This option would include Wednesdays being a no student day. And to start off, I don't have this here, but I am strongly suggesting that we would need at least 2 weeks after April break. I know there's been discussion about that being partially because of folks traveling over April break, but even more so, it's the logistics of being ready, the potential for furniture to arrive, and the time that it'll take to retool, to be prepared to change our programming for the rest of the year. So the rolling start, when that happens, when that week happens, day one, in theory, Monday, since we're changing so much, it would still be maroon cohort only for Monday, adjusting to new classroom setup, lunch schedules, recess schedules, snack schedules. Day two, gold only, adjusting. And then day three, in theory, would be Wednesday. And then Thursday and Friday would be all students back in school. And the date of this would depend on what is decided upon as a start date if we should reopen. But that first week would really be a roll in, and there would be a lot to get used to for students. So I would really push for maroon and gold only the first 2 days, because it's going to be school will look very different. So the rationale for pre-opening days, Donna mentioned that teachers really need 2 days, whether they're Wednesdays or a couple days are changed from student days to not student days. Classroom setup, staff retooling and working on a new scope and sequence of curriculum for academics and social emotional learning for the remainder of the year. Little incidentals like taping up floors for physical distancing in the classrooms, organizing materials for preparing for larger groups. So 2 days, 2 solid days, I would anticipate would be the minimum. This is just a little bit of data we have, not really super, it is important for today actually. Room measurement, so in reopening, we would be looking closely at specific rooms and class sizes. So our rooms are different shapes and sizes. Some have different built-ins. Some have some more furniture that could be removed, but some of it cannot. Some have sinks and built-ins and shelves. So classrooms fit 18 to 21 students at 3-foot desk spacing, or 3-foot student spacing rather, and I'll explain that. So some classes might have 20 students, but the room is only suitable for 18. So we have to work through that and figure all that out and decide what we're going to do and how we're going to deal with it. And here's a diagram, just this to be very, very clear. So for people to know now, and then if we're moving forward and teachers, we all need to begin planning 3-foot student spacing at Pond Cove. In order to make this work with the 18 to 21 students, we are defining it as you see in this picture. It's 2, so each square on the floor is 1 foot. So it's really 2 feet desk to desk. Given the size of our desks and the size of our students, equates to 3 feet of of student spacing, body to body, shoulder to shoulder. So you can see it's tight, but it passes. Now, if some classrooms or class sizes are smaller and they have a slightly larger room, they would be able to space their desk at 3-foot actual desk space. So here's an example where my cursor is. That's a 3rd grade classroom with 18 desks. These are 3-foot desk to desk. If you had 21 students in here, it would get tighter and you would have to go to the 2-foot desk to desk. So there's variation, but the low bar would be set at 2-foot table leg to table, desk leg to desk leg. Here, over here where my cursor is, here's an example of a 4th grade classroom. The front row of a room where we anticipate we could fit 20 to 21 students, it's only showing the front row. These desks are 2-foot spaced with 3-foot, approximately 3-foot shoulder to shoulder. You can see these students, chairs are bigger. This is 4th grade and students are bigger. So you're really pushing it on the 3-foot shoulder to shoulder. But I think we have it. Not ideal, but I think we have it. Here's a kindergarten room with 16 desks, available space. There is a couple more, we could fit 18. And so for this particular kindergarten class, and given the space of the room and the class size of maroon plus gold, we could fit the class in this room. Pretty much just takes up all the space. But you can see there's an example. Okay, then district-wide considerations. Really, Donna has just talked about all these things, so I won't go into it, but just to review some of Pond Cove specific and district, like the need to reconfigure drop-off and pick up. Something that wasn't mentioned, staff, like just access to campus and parking. If drop-off and pickup takes a long time, like if our dismissal is maybe like a 45-minute dismissal, we would just be working to work out the kinks with traffic on campus. Donna really mentioned this other stuff. So I think, so that for me, I know I just kind of talked right through, but I hope that was helpful.
Thanks, Jason. All right, we're going to move right to Troy and Kyle.
All right. Hi, everybody. I am 3rd in line. So Donna stole a lot of my thunder. Jason stole what was left. So I'm going to feel like I'm not a very creative thinker here. But just really quickly, I'll go through it in case there's something that's different from what they had. The idea of increase, so we kind of broke it down into benefit, challenges, and kind of needs for reopening. And the benefits are clearly the increased in-person learning opportunities for all students. So even remote students would have increased time with their teachers, because right now they're still every other day. So when I say increased in person, that means virtually in person with their virtual teachers as well, their remote teachers. So there is an increased learning opportunities. Opportunities for students to work with their non-cohorted peers. So they have gone for the year largely without being with their non-cohorted groups. So I think that would be a benefit for our students. I think anytime we have additional opportunities for social emotional learning and mental health check-ins, that is always a good thing. Build academic stamina gradually in preparation for the fall of 2021. So instead of, there is a benefit, I think, to doing that in a way that students, teachers, we all kind of can slowly and gradually build that stamina up, because as Jessica said, we have kids eating extra meals and they're not exercising and all of these things. And to think we're going to throw them into 5 days of school a week and have them smile and love it, and view it as not adding additional stress, I think we need to be thoughtful of that. So I think that is really an important one, is to gradually build back that stamina. It's also a benefit, and I think it's important that we maintain our independent academic and social support times for students, and those are occurring currently on Wednesdays, but those have been some really valuable opportunities for staff to work with students and help them maintain the pace, and to do check-ins. We've created new programs. We have some band groups. There's a lot happening on our Wednesdays right now, and that would be a part of it. And then I think there's a potential to reduce screen time due to increased in-person learning for the hybrid model. So I think that would be a benefit for our students if we could reduce some of that screen time. So those are some quick benefits. I'm sure there's more, but those are the ones that pop out. So challenges. And because there's twice as many challenges, don't mistake that for meaning that it's more difficult than it's worth to do. But I'm just saying there are a lot of challenges that somebody that may not work in the buildings on an everyday basis would just not think of. So space and furniture to meet the social distancing requirements is continuing to be a problem or a concern. Creating schedules to continue meeting a wide range of student programming while maintaining required social distancing. That's really a big one for us. Donna alluded to the fact that we would struggle to maintain our cohorts. 5th and 6th grade, we could remain relatively cohorted. 7th and 8th, really not going to be able to remain cohorted. And a lot of that is because part of what we offer here at Cape Elizabeth Middle School is a really rich program academically that offers a lot of different opportunities for kids. And I think we would be short-sighted or wrong to, in the 11th hour of a year, to remove that and say, well, it would be nice, but I'm sorry, you can't take geometry anymore. Or, I know you're in French, but now you're gonna have to take Spanish. I think we have to just understand that so far this year, we've been able to maintain the integrity of our programming, and we plan to continue to do that, although it is at the risk of some of the cohorting. So that's what number 2 means. Parent drop off and pickup, traffic flow, we're working on that. I think anyone that's waited on that line knows it's a problem. I think we just have to work on a plan and work with parents to solve it. There's the cohorts again. Allied arts will be reduced or partially eliminated for full remote students, because those teachers are right now, our allied arts are all offered remotely to all students. And we're going to be needing to bring them back into school to work in person with students. So there would still be some allied arts for remote students, but I think there could be a slight reduction. It's also, I think it's been said, but teachers creating a curriculum that will work for when the students in the cohorts are combined. So group A is not necessarily where group B is. Their interests are different. Their personality of that class is different, their cohort. So I think that is going to be a crucial part of this. Teachers creating classroom routine structures for the combined cohorts. I really think of school as a small version of our Cape Elizabeth greater community is our schools. And within CEMS, we have our own community, and then that gets broken down again to grade level communities, which then gets broken down to team communities, which then has been broken down to cohort communities. So there's a lot of work that goes into that. It's not as simple as throwing kids into one room and saying, there, you're in the same class, have fun and go. It really takes some expertise on the teacher's part to make that all work smoothly and value everyone and set the norms again for what those rooms are. So that's really bullets 6 and 7 there kind of going together. And then number 8 really goes with that as well. And this one has been, I think there's a little bit of misconception that when there's a voice of teachers being concerned with returning to school, that it's about their personal health always. And I just do not see that. I think that it's really about the respect they have for the programs they've created and for the students that they work with every day, and maintaining the high level of student engagement. Many quieter students have found their voices this year, and they're participating at a much higher level due to the smaller class size. And we really value that aspect of this year so far. So I think we can move forward. We always try to get all kids involved, and we will continue to do that. But it is something that we definitely want to mention and make people realize that's something that we're worried about losing. Potential increases in contact tracing and quarantines just because of larger numbers. Again, building the academic stamina. It's really important to just be open about we're not able to ensure 3 feet during hallways and recesses. It's a struggle now, and to add more kids, just reality is that I don't want anyone thinking that we're keeping our kids 3 feet apart in the hallway transitions. That is not happening. We are not using lockers. We'll speed transitions up as much as we can. They're not congregating in the hallway, hanging out. We're trying to move them along. But to think that they're 3 feet apart is just probably not accurate. And then there is a real potential. Just a few years ago when we did our future search, a really big focus was on the physical and emotional and mental health of our students here at Cape Elizabeth because of the really large pressures, academic pressures to be successful, to be always doing your best. And that has not gone away because of a pandemic. That stress is still there. In some ways, coming back more will help maybe that stress because students will have more contact time with their teachers. We just want to make sure that we're thoughtful as teachers moving forward and as a community to the potential increase in academic, social, and physical stressors that kids will see. We want to be aware. Welcome back needs. I don't really know why I titled that, but I think that it is what we're thinking can help us to address the challenges that we just talked about. And teachers need time to prepare the rooms and materials for the combined cohorts. Students will need some time to adjust to the additional pressures and expectations of additional in-person learning. I think it's going to be really important to continue utilizing our Wednesdays for those student supports and check-ins and curriculum planning. Kids could feel very easily like they can slip under the radar, I think, and we want to make sure we have a good grasp on where they are and how they're feeling and what they're doing. That Wednesday contact has just been crucial for many. We want to partner with parents to avoid traffic jams at the drop-off and pickup. So some staggered dismissals. Arrival's not such a big deal. You're really dropping something off to us for someone. You're not necessarily waiting for them to come out of the building or to find you in the line. So it feels more like a dismissal problem than the drop-off. It was really fun, and I need to thank a group of parents that I have a long list. We spent 2 Wednesdays ago, I guess it was, we spent time and they really did all the work of unloading the containers, the shipping containers out here. All the furniture has been emptied out, put in a gym, cleaned, stacked, and without that help, that would be another thing on our to-do list. So I reached out today to them, and I believe on Thursday we have a group of parents, or we're working to get some parents to come in for a couple hours and start moving it from the gym into some classrooms. So I think just partnering with parents will be a great way to kind of push this along and support each other through the process. It definitely is going to take everybody working together. And next one, Kyle, I think it's the last one. So much like Jason, I think the roll-in idea, it's going to be crucial for our kids. Obviously, our teachers are going to need a couple days ahead to plan. They're going to have to do seating charts now. Seating charts are mandatory in order to limit our potential contact tracing. And along with that comes a lot of thought and stuff that goes in the process. It's not just drawing names out of a hat and put them on a desk. And so we're really thinking, this is basically the same thing Jason proposed. So the first 2 days in this scenario, it's a Monday, Tuesday, doesn't necessarily have to be that. The first would be the maroon cohort. So a small group of kids familiar with each other, going through their 7-block schedule, because right now we have a 6-block schedule. We will be transitioning to a 7-block schedule. And then the next day on this, it happens to be Tuesday, the gold students would get that same opportunity, practice, drop off, dismissal, the whole 9 yards. We will be using Pond Cove gym for lunch, in addition to increasing the size of our gym for lunch. So there'll be some new routines. And then potentially on whatever, I guess, days 4 and 5, or in this case, Thursday and Friday, it would be to return all students and just get after it and do it. So that's kind of where we are thinking we're at the middle school.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And Jeff.
Okay. So I don't have a PowerPoint, but I've got some words for you to look at.
While Jeff's pulling that up, we have 45 attendees. So 28 panelists from the committee, and then an additional 45 attendees. So just wanted to give you that number.
Okay, so the top part of this document is just about Wednesday. Donna's already covered that. Phase 1, the proposal at the high school is to bring seniors back from May 6th to May 21st. And we would be following the mini term schedule that we have right now. So it's a little simpler than what Troy was just describing, but it's essentially what will be the final 2.5 weeks of the senior year anyway. Because our seniors are scheduled to go on the senior transition project starting Monday, May 24th. So the rationale, it's the only time all year seniors have been together. One really important thing is it allows our teachers to provide some in-person support for some seniors who may be struggling. We're lucky that there's not a significantly greater number of those seniors than there is in a normal year, in-person year, but there is not the same amount of time that we normally have to sort of assist them in person. Certainly normalize more students being in the building. One aspect that's unique to the high school is that we're going to be giving all kinds of exams starting the second week in May for about 3 weeks in a row, primarily AP exams, although there are others as well. And bringing all of our students back in all grades while also doing those exams I'm not saying it's impossible, but it would be a super challenge to be able to do that and create a testing environment that's conducive to students who've been working really hard in these classes all year. So the May 6th start provides exactly 10 days after the spring break. And the other part is that seniors will be the least impacted by the fact that, and I've put this one in red, there will be no bus runs to or from the high school once more students begin to come to school each day. And that is essentially, as I understand it, because of the physical distancing requirements for the buses. There are just limits on the number of buses and the number of drivers. So high school students, except for special needs students, would not be bused to school. Our seniors are by far the least dependent on buses, and so they would feel the impact of that the least. And the idea is after the seniors have their 2.5 to 3 weeks in person in school, then the seniors leave on their senior transition project and all the rest of our students come back for the final 3 weeks of their school year. It'll bring us up to 75% building capacity. We would keep with the same mini term schedule that we have now right through the end of the year. There will be a few seniors in the building, as there always are these weeks, seniors who are catching up on some things they need to do to earn the opportunity to be able to graduate. And so it gives us close to a full building capacity. It allows transportation issues at the other 2 schools to be worked out, with maybe the optimistic but maybe unrealistic hope that maybe some bus transportation could be available for students, because that will be a challenge, particularly for some 9th and 10th grade students. Not a lot, but definitely some, and the families who are dependent on that are dependent on that. So maybe there's some opportunity. In my mind, the biggest reason to think about the biggest advantage of bringing more students back to any of our 3 buildings is it's going to assist with transition in the fall. And we'll reduce the anxiety. I mean, we'll encounter some anxiety now and hopefully reduce some anxiety in the fall. but do it in a staged, planned way that doesn't feel overwhelming to anybody, students or staff. On good weather days, students will be able and expected to transition outdoors and to remain outdoors until a couple of minutes before class begins to try to avoid some of that congregating outside of classes while teachers disinfect their desks. I do want to make a point about two important notes. We will have some overflow students who will still not, even at 3-foot distancing, will not safely fit in our classes. It will probably be only a handful for a relatively small number of classes, but it will be a reality in some classes that we will not be. We did a measurement of all of our classrooms and did 3-foot distancing, and the average class, there are some differences class to class, but the average class can fit about 18 desks safely, with the 3-foot distancing between students and 6 feet between students and teachers. So some of our classes have more than 18 students. So on a rotating basis, some students will need to be in an overflow area, probably in the gym, to access the class remotely. But all students will be getting 4 days of in-person instruction for most of their classes, and some may have, there's on a rotating basis, there'll be a few who might have to rotate out of particular classes each day and be in the gymnasium. In order to make this work, particularly during lunchtime, I do also want to point out that we will need to continue the practice, well, expand what is already an expanding reality of open campus for more of our students than we typically have in our regular school year. So we would anticipate having open campus during non-class time, not class time, but during non-class time for students in grades 10, 11, and 12. It's essentially to motivate many not to be in school during lunchtime, or at least some not to be in school during lunch, and to reduce the number of students who need to be in study hall as well. So that is sort of the plan at the high school.
Thank you, Jeff.
Sure.
Questions, comments? We'll post all of this information on the website. So there was a lot of information to take in, I know, but we will post it so you can look it over. Do you have any questions that you want to ask the principals or to me while you have them here today? Oh, Bree.
Mine was super quick. I'm just, I know that furniture is coming up on every single plan's list of, have we looked at like standing desks or like alternative furniture? Because I'm just thinking like standing desks is something that even in a normal year is helpful to have. So I just kind of throw that out there as an idea.
Any furniture that we order is going to be a problem to securing it at this point. So
I think I'm just also thinking, Donna, like after
Yeah,
all
the
this is
future.
over, it would be nice to have furniture that we would actually use. And I know that standing desk or something that a lot of kids really benefit from. So
Yeah. We've looked at this. Yeah, we've
looking.
looked at the single desks that you can push together into tables eventually, so that we can use them. So yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Zakia's next.
Oh, Zakia?
Thank you. I remember at some point you mentioning that we may not, the school may not be able to accommodate remote students. And I was wondering if that's still the case or whether that's been changed.
That is the case. That is the case.
So that brings up the concern, at least, let's see, was it for the middle school that there may be reduced or no allied arts for the remote students? So can Troy talk about that?
I can talk about it. I can't give a great answer.
Okay, that's okay.
No, but it really has to do with providing enough staff to cover all the kids that are in the building. And our teachers are not teaching synchronously with students. So having a group of 24 in front of, say, the art teacher, while she has another 24 zooming into the room at the same time, our teachers have not been doing that. Now, that's a lie to say they've not been doing it at all, because some have, but the general practice has not been to do that. So we are working on a plan where they could get, I think, most allied arts offered to them. Now, some kids have already rotated through their trimester of art, so they would not necessarily have art. Some have already, so it may be a little bit of a shell game to make sure that kids align with what's available with what they may have not had yet moving forward. So we are working on it, and that is our goal, to try and give them an equitable experience.
We may have to hire some permanent subs too for the rest of the year to provide for that. So that's another possibility. But I have faith that Troy and Kyle will figure this out.
I'll be
Kate
teaching.
Zellers. I'm sorry.
Dr. Rosenthal.
Oh, I think Kate was next.
Oh, sorry, Kate. Poor Kate.
I just had, that's okay, I'm good. I get it out there. My question was specifically about the possibility of half-day Wednesdays, which was that would all of the planned professional development for the rest of the year be canceled so that we can maintain our planning time and our regular meetings times? I mean, I just assumed that there would be no development, as few staff meetings, as few other meetings as possible, because if we lost that morning, obviously we're working with students, but then there is time in there for, a half an hour of planning or something like that. So that was my question.
Jason, do you want to take that or?
Sure, I can. So there are no more district-wide PD Wednesdays on the calendar. April 7th was going to be the last one, but then we switched it out for March 31st. And so certainly at the building level, we would do everything we could to respect that time and leave it open. And I don't know if other principals have ideas or would like to share.
They don't want to share, but I have to say that we have talked about that, and that would be the plan as much as we can do that. Yeah.
But sorry to jump in, just to be clear though, that would get in the way of us meeting our year-end goals around PD, correct? Like responsive classroom, DEI work. So I want to be clear that there would be a loss there in that time.
Yes.
Yes, definitely. Yes, in speaking only for Pond Cove, right? There are meetings within our strategic plan that we just would not be able to do. Yeah.
Dr. Rosenthal is next.
Thanks. I had a couple little things I wanted to just mention, but I also just wanted to sort of say thank you, because it was great to hear those presentations. I feel like, I was asked to present about the mental health impacts. It's like not fun stuff to think about. And it's nice to hear about sort of like what's going on in the schools, and just hearing, I don't spend time in the school, so I appreciated hearing sort of that. Just feels like more positive and something that I'm happy to be able to think about. So thank you. A couple things. One is with that, I think obviously like there's some positive lessons that hopefully we can take away from COVID. Like, for some kids, some of this seems to have worked better, and, kids are doing better. And so I think like that is valuable. So I just wanted to kind of like say that out loud, because, education, you guys are definitely like innovators. And so I do hope that some things that worked well can continue. One thing, just in terms of the return to school day, if we go to this, the 4-day-a-week plan, like if we do 10 days from the end of April vacation, the 10th day would be Monday, May 3rd. And I just wonder, so first of all, like there's no evidence that says that it's safer to have kids out of school than in school after vacation. Because we know that like a lot of the spread happens in the community. So in some ways, like school is actually the safer place to have kids. So I don't know that we can sort of say that it's better to have kids out of school for 2 weeks. I totally understand the logistical issues of like needing time to get the kids back. I don't think we should make that decision based on like a safety factor. And I just also wondered about using like the last 2 days of that, like the roll-in time, if like the last 2 days of whatever days students are not there could be the 2 roll-in days, rather than like the first 2 days of the next week, like the day that you have just gold there or just maroon cohorts. Maybe that could be the last 2 days of whatever the sort of kids non-school time period would be. And yeah, I just agree with the idea that like there's going to be kinks to be worked out, and to do it all in the fall is probably going to be hard. And if there's a way to start using some of this time that we have, I do think there's value to that. I think suspense is really hard. And so anytime like everyone's sitting with something potentially new, for kids also, if they know that this change is coming, and for, the staff and everyone in school too, it's hard to wait for change to happen. So I think there's going to be a lot of like increasing anxiety during the waiting period. So I don't necessarily know that waiting longer is better. So I just figured I'd add that.
Thanks, Dr. Rosenthal. Before, it is 4:30 and I know there's some more questions and I'd be happy to take those while people still want to hang around. Obviously, we have still not made any decisions. So I think that we need another meeting on Thursday. So I'm going to plan another meeting on this coming Thursday, day after tomorrow, from 3 to 4, where we can really do some work on some decision-making for our recommendations. So if you aren't able to come, I certainly understand, but maybe you could just forward me, email me your thoughts or concerns, and I will pass them on to the group. So Ingrid.
Okay, so I just wanted specifically, sorry, to speak to the Wednesdays. If we have students in school on half-day Wednesdays, I just wanted to make sure that the community understands that that would change what teachers can offer for remote work on remote days, because that would significantly cut back on the amount of time we have to prepare those materials, and it takes an absolutely tremendous amount of time to do that. I mean, it takes me, I'm honest when I'm saying that I'm working 12 hours a day and have been since the start of the closure last March, just to be able to keep up with everything that I'm doing. Because as Donna mentioned, it is double planning and all of this is new. So I'm constantly creating the materials for my students for the remote days. And there's just no way I could do that if I'm going to be teaching half days. And if that's the decision that's made, that's fine. I just want to make the community clear on the fact that there is a trade-off to this, that what students would be doing on remote days would not be of the same quality as what they're receiving right now. It's just not possible to provide both.
So Ingrid, you're talking about the option of adding the Wednesday morning.
Yes.
Okay, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
When is next?
Actually, I don't think I was next. I think Zakira.
Well, I'm sorry, Zakia's put her hand down and then back up again.
Oh,
so-
okay. All right.
Sorry.
Sorry, I didn't want to jump the line here. All
That's
right.
fine.
I just wanted to point out a couple things about those Wednesdays, and it's important about, in particular, about the Pond Cove staff who have been really working more than you can even imagine. And that is the other thing that will happen is if we have these lunches that are spread out, there's going to be this need for more supervision. So that means that that some of those teachers will be pulled away from what might be some planning time that they would have during the day to supervise. So it's really important that the community understands the burden, not necessarily the burden, but the pressure on Pond Cove staff, for bringing students back, and to be just to be respectful of that. The other thing about the 2-week period afterwards is that I think this also involves staff and our own vaccinations, and not everyone will have the vaccination completed and have the 2 weeks out. I know I will. I'm feeling very lucky about that, and that makes me feel better about it. But I think that some staff are also haven't been able to get their appointments so that they would be fully vaccinated right after vacation. And I know that the community wants kids back and for their social and emotional and academic well-being, but I think it's also important to think that we would also like to feel confident in bringing all those students back, that we feel that we're protected. So that is another thing to think about with the 2 weeks. Thank you.
Thanks, Wim. Now Zakia.
Of course, it's also important to acknowledge that there are some teachers and staff that will be unable to be vaccinated for various medical reasons. But not to pick on whichever principal said this, but the idea of return to normalcy, of course, is fallacious thinking, because we're going to at whatever point we're able to get our students back into the schools. And of course, I think there's not one person on this call right now that does not want to do that, wholeheartedly. The school environment will look and feel very different for all of our students until, I think we get much further along in our, fight in this pandemic with students probably still wearing masks, still having to physical distance at whatever distance that may be, and walk a certain direction in hallways and all those things. I think that it's important also to acknowledge that the stress of a pandemic with regards to worry about a loved one or the student themselves becoming ill, or any economic hardship or any other thing, does not magically go away when the student gets back into the school. Sadly, there is not that much that I heard today from Jessica. As wonderful as that presentation was, that makes me, feel as though, that there is anything specific about the full-time school environment versus the hybrid environment that is going to change that. I think we're, in a very difficult situation, and, the cases, as everybody is aware, cases are increasing nationally and regionally, as well as in our state, particularly in the young age groups. And I wanted to point out that when you mentioned before, Superintendent, that we may, if the cases reach a point at which the state designates the school district in yellow, that we will not be able to just return to the hybrid format, that we will have to go fully remote, because there's no sort of going halfway, kind of halfway. That raised some red flags, of course. So I think that's something to consider. Because of the way things are kind of trending right now, given maybe some eased restrictions, potentially coronavirus variants, and maybe some vacations and things like that.
Thank you, Zakia.
Thank you.
And
Of course,
I think
thank you.
Laura is going to be our last speaker today.
All right, thank you. I know we've spent a lot of time on logistics about getting back into the school building, and which we should, because that's going to take a lot of effort. But I would like to think, and I'm going to gather some information before Thursday regarding the students who are still remote. Those classes are going to double, and it's going to be, in some cases, 24, 25, 26 kids in a class now on a screen, which is going to be a huge change in terms of planning and getting ready, to the point about being able to be fully ready to present for those classes. It takes a ton of work. So that it's going to look different. And a few people had mentioned increased screen time, or, coming back to school, being in the building will decrease screen time. I can only imagine this is going to increase screen time for those remote students, having their classes every day with the addition of allied arts and things like that. So I know that's not the focus on getting kids back into school, but there are repercussions for those students who are remote as well. So I just want to point that out, and I'll try and get some information to you, Donna, just from the teachers who are teaching those remote students.
Okay, great. Thank you, Laura. That'd be great. So we'll post this information and you can look over it. I know you have a lot to think about now. There is a lot to think about. I just want to say that we are not a deciding committee, and we may have one recommendation that we take to the board. We may have more than one. It is in the end the board that makes the decision and takes the vote. So I just wanted to say that so people aren't panicking. But I want to thank everybody who presented today, and thank you for the information. Thank you all for giving your time. This is just really important. And I will see you on Thursday at 3 o'clock. We'll send out an invite so you can attend. So have a great rest of your night. We have a budget meeting tonight that we're going into, so many of us, so it's going to be a long evening. But so thank you all for your time. Bye.
Thank you.